This story still sends chills down my spine, and honestly, I'm not sure I'll ever fully recover from what happened. It all began 2 years ago during my college days when I worked as a babysitter for a wealthy family on weekends. The job seemed perfect. 2 adorable kids, a luxurious house, and free time in the evenings. But one autumn night, everything changed. Before we dive in, what's your worst babysitting nightmare? A screaming toddler? A prank gone wrong? Well, buckle up. This one is straight out of a horror movie, and trust me, it only gets worse from here. It was a chilly Friday evening. The leaves crunched under my feet as I arrived at the family's sprawling property. They had it all: multiple garages, a picturesque pond, and even a pool house equipped with a bar, arcade games, and a massive TV. It felt like a dream job. The 2 kids, James and Jessica, were sweet and well-behaved. They each had their own playrooms filled with every toy imaginable. Friday night was uneventful. After putting the kids to bed, I decided to unwind in the pool house. I FaceTimed some friends, laughed, and watched White Chicks. Everything felt normal, peaceful, but that peace wouldn't last for long. The first sign of trouble came just as I was getting comfortable. The intercom buzzed, startling me. It was Jessica. She sounded scared, saying she heard noises. I immediately ran to the house to check on her. She was already back in bed by the time I arrived, looking scared but safe. I tucked her in, reassured her, and left. I figured it was just the creaks and groans of an old house settling. Or was it? Let me ask you this. Have you ever heard strange noises at night? Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe it's not. What do? Investigate? Ignore it? Well, I chose to investigate, and looking back, I'm not sure that was the right decision. As I walked back to the pool house, the air felt heavier. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just overthinking. But then the intercom went off again. This time when I answered, there was no voice. Just the sound of faint breathing. "Jessica? James?" I called. No response. My heart started racing. Was it a prank or something else? I grabbed my phone and called my friend Kelsey, who told me to stop being paranoid. But as I stared at the house from the pool house window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow. A tall figure moved past one of the hallway windows inside the house. It wasn't James. It wasn't Jessica. It was someone else. I dropped the phone and ran back inside to get the kids. My hands were shaking as I punched in the code to the door. My worst fears were confirmed when I heard Jessica scream from her room. I bolted down the hallway and found her crying. "There's a man in here!" she sobbed. I grabbed both kids and ran them to the pool house as fast as I could. I called 911, trying to keep my voice steady as I described the situation. The operator told me to stay calm, but how could I? That man was still in the house. What would you do in that moment? Fight? Hide? Run? Think about it. 2 terrified kids depending on you, a stranger in the house, and no idea if they're armed. It's a nightmare scenario. And it was about to get worse. As we huddled in the dark pool house waiting for the police, I heard something that made my heart drop. The intercom buzzed again. This time it wasn't Jessica, it wasn't James, it was him. His breathing was heavier, more deliberate, and then he whispered my name. I froze. My blood turned to ice. How did he know my name? The kids started crying and I had to shush them while trying to keep it together. Finally, the police arrived. Their flashlights swept across the property as they stormed the house. Moments later, they dragged him out in handcuffs. The sight of his face is something I'll never forget. His twisted, inbred features, the look of pure malice in his eyes as he stared directly at me. The kids were safe, but that night scarred all of us. I never went back to that house, and the family pressed charges to ensure that man would never hurt anyone again. To this day, I can't shake the feeling of his eyes on me, watching, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that intercom buzz in my nightmares. Have you ever felt truly unsafe in a place you thought was secure? How do you know when you're really alone? Think about it, because sometimes the danger is closer than you think. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales. And remember, always lock your doors. You never know who's watching. Have you ever thought you were alone in the woods, only to realize you weren't? What would you do if you heard footsteps outside your tent in the dead of night? Tonight, let me tell you about the most terrifying night of my life. A night I'll never forget, and one that keeps me far away from the forest to this day. This happened 2 years ago when I was 28. I decided to go solo camping in a local woodland with my beagle, Reggie. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape, just me, my dog, and the serenity of nature. But as it turns out, I wasn't as alone as I thought. It was November. The days were mild, but the nights were chilly, so I came prepared. My gear included a portable fire pit, a tent, a sleeping bag, and my fishing supplies. I also had enough food to last me 2 days. After hiking about a mile into the woods, I found the perfect spot near the lake to set up camp. Reggie and I spent the day fishing. While I was focused on the water, Reggie suddenly froze, his tail dropping, staring into the dense forest. I followed his gaze but saw nothing. At the time, I assumed it was just a squirrel or maybe a deer, but looking back, I'm not so sure anymore. As the sun began to set, I noticed something strange. Across the lake, near my campsite, I saw 2 figures walking into the woods. They were far away, just silhouettes, but they looked off. Their movements were slow, almost deliberate. When I got back to my tent, I froze. The zipper was open. Someone had been inside. Who do you think it could have been? A prankster? Or maybe something worse? Here's the strange part. Nothing was missing. My fishing gear, fire pit, even my food, all untouched. Still, the idea of someone rummaging through my things creeped me out. I decided to move my campsite further up the lake. Imagine being in the middle of nowhere, the sun setting, and realizing someone's been watching you. Would you stay the night, or pack up and leave immediately? Comment below. That night, after eating dinner and putting out the fire, Reggie and I settled into the tent. The forest was eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Reggie's ears perked up. He growled low, staring at the tent walls. I whispered, "What is it, boy?" Then I heard it, a soft whistle. Not a bird, not the wind. This was deliberate. Someone was whistling. Reggie growled louder as the sound came closer. Then came footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They stopped right outside my tent. What would you do in this moment? Pretend you're asleep? Confront them? Or grab your things and run? Let me know. I was frozen in fear. My heart pounded as I tried to muster up the courage to speak. "You'd better leave," I shouted in a shaky voice. "I have a gun." The footsteps retreated, but not far enough. Reggie's growling continued. Then out of nowhere, a scream tore through the night. A woman's scream. It echoed across the forest, chilling me to the core. Now I had a choice to make: stay in the tent and risk another encounter, or run. I chose the latter. Grabbing Reggie and my flashlight, I bolted for my truck. I didn't stop running until I reached it, locking the doors and sitting there, trembling. The next morning, I returned to gather my things. Everything was still there, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As I packed, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting someone or something to emerge from the trees. Later, I called the non-emergency police line to report the scream and the intruders. They said they'd send someone to investigate, but I never followed up. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there that night. But one thing is certain: I'll never camp there again. Have you ever had an experience that made your blood run cold? Share your stories in the comments. And remember, next time you think you're alone in the woods, you might not be. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more chilling tales. Until next time, stay safe and don't go camping alone. Have you ever been home alone on a rainy night, only to realize you're not really alone? Let me tell you about a night that still haunts me. But beware, this story might just make you rethink every creak and shadow in your house. It was a rainy weekend night, and I decided to stay in. My parents were downstairs and my brother was out for the evening. Or so I thought. I was in my room, binge-watching scary movies. I was halfway through a thriller when I paused it to grab some snacks from the pantry. The house was quiet except for the rain outside, but as I grabbed a box of crackers, I heard something, a sound, faint but distinct. Wait, have you ever heard an unexplained sound when you're alone? Did you check it out? Or just hope it was nothing? Let me know in the comments what you would do in this situation. But then I noticed the backyard motion light was on. I paused the movie again, and this time, I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, coming from downstairs. I grabbed my phone and texted our family group chat, "Who's home right now?" A minute later, my mom replied, "We're not home." "Why?" That's when I froze. If it wasn't my parents, it had to be my brother, Alex. Right? But Alex never used the back door, and he wasn't supposed to be home. I texted again, "Alex, is that you?" No reply. Imagine this for a second. You're sitting in your room, hearing footsteps in a supposedly empty house. What would you do? Call the police? Lock your door? Or would you investigate? Think carefully. Because the next decision could change everything. I could hear them getting closer, slowly, deliberately. I turned off the TV and slid under my blanket, pretending to be asleep. The door creaked open. Someone was there, watching me. I kept my eyes barely open, just enough to see them. Their head tilted slightly, as if trying to figure out if I was awake. My heart pounded so hard I thought they'd hear it. "Alex, please tell me that's you." Alex replied almost instantly, "No, I'm not home. What are you talking about?" That's when I knew someone was in the house. I dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher about what was happening. That's when the footsteps started again, moving away from my door. The dispatcher told me to stay quiet and wait for help. When the police knocked on the door, I finally felt safe enough to let them in. They searched every corner of the house, every closet, every bed. Empty. But then one officer noticed something chilling. The back door had been unlocked. Hours later, the narrator sits by the window, too scared to sleep. Suddenly, the backyard motion light flicks on again. I froze, staring out the window. This time, I saw him, a man. He was walking away from the house toward the dark corner of the yard where the light didn't reach. I realized then he'd tried to come back. That's the scariest part. He wasn't here to rob us. He was here for something else. And I'll never forget the image of those eyes peering into my room. So remember this. Always lock your doors, because you never know who's watching. What would you do in this situation? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to lock your doors tonight.